And so we are very happy that it's going on quite well. There's a slight change in the program. It was our mistake. Like we wanted it to be 10-day continuous, including the weekends. But now I found out that 14th and 15th there are no lectures. And that will be that there will be lectures on 14th and 15th, so that we will finish by 19th. Yeah, so that we have some time before Fausto return to Europe. So 14th and 15th, and we will send the revised schedule to all our online participants. But for you, please tell your other participants, your friends. So Fausto, now we start.
Thank you. Deepak, maybe. So, welcome, and today we will precisely approach all the limits of such vision sketched and presented yesterday. And let's go. So obviously, then we will discuss on the issues. We have many issues to discuss today, even in relation to yesterday. But please, so just a moment. Okay, perfect. So the title of this course is The Negative Issues of the Modern Galilean-Cartesian Worldview and the Foundational Debate on the Science for Riemann to Quantum Mechanics and Gödel. I am aware that could be something harder as the yesterday menu, but anyway, this helps us just to make a metamorphosis, a change on our view on the thing, and to prepare ourselves to approach, since tomorrow, what complexity is and why we are there in order to question ourselves about our life and our knowledge in a complex world. So, as said yesterday, Galilei and Descartes formulated a huge and vast program of knowledge and self-emancipation by knowledge, technology, and shareable rationality. Please remark that the formulation of a program does not mean the fulfillment of the program. That's what we will approach today, in the sense that, if you will, that program serve as accelerator for knowledge, is a very, very useful program and motivating program for for knowledge, simplifying issues and method in science, but on the other side, find at a certain point its limits. In this respect, please remark that, as yesterday seen in the debate, there is a sort of intertwining between science and philosophy. So this program, let's say, roughly speaking, Galilean-Cartesianist program, finds as well critics on the side of science as of philosophy. And the convergence of these critics show how to have to move forwards in order to think something other, or the world in a new way. Descartes not only formulate a sort of scientific method that was more or less already formulated by Galileo, but provide further to implement such program to a new kind of philosophy, a paradigmatic form of understanding and viewing the world, and consequently to display new forms of being in the world. And we will see it by commentating quotes from two essays that I have given to Deepak or will give tomorrow, coming from Heidegger writings, The Age of Worldview and Science and Meditation. Then we will approach Heidegger in a more detailed way. So what we call today modern worldview, or neuzeitliche Weltbild, is the goal or the imagined goal of such program. Okay? So please just remark, I have no slide for it because it's too complicated things, but please remark that worldview is not the same as a subjective representation of the world, what we can call Weltanschauung. Okay? So Weltbild, in sense of picturing the world as it is not a subjective, partial idea of our world perception. Okay? There are two different things. One comes from a strong rationalism and orient science, first of all, and even consequently also modern philosophy. The other is something emerging a bit later with Willem Dilthey, and is a sort of more tolerant, if you will, more historically oriented approach to how some individual or communities can perceive the world from their own perspective. Okay? But the world picture or world view is not something submitted to relativity. The opposite is something to which converge stable or evident form of knowledge in order to depict the world as it is. Okay? There is a strong debate at the beginning of the 20th century as well on Weltanschauung and Weltbild in two separate contexts. For example, let's mention the sort of manifesto for phenomenology written from Husserl in the journal Logos 1911, okay? Philosophy as strong science, Philosophie als strenge Wissenschaft. Und das ist a very, very hard critique to Weltanschauung's philosophy, to the philosophy of world perception. Even phenomenology, trying to describe how the subject or how we as subject perceive and experience the world, critique and define itself in opposition to this idea of Weltanschauung. Okay? So Weltbild is something more belonging to positive science as pieces of description of the world. Let's think a sort of metaphor. Let's a mosaic. Okay? Every single discovery will be a piece of a mosaic, and the mosaic must depict the whole world. The entire world. Is a program, is a wishful thinking, but anyway serves to orient the science as we will see. The idea of word image or word picture is relatively new also. So imago mundi in Latin was something related to cartography and to geography, but Weltbild comes precisely or becomes famous from a writing of Niels Bohr, Zum Weltbild der Physik, the word picture of physics, published in the 20s and the 30s, and will be, for people coming from German studies, was explored from physician that was also interested by Heidegger philosophy, Carl Friedrich von Weizsäcker, Zum Weltbild der Physik. But if you go also to Anglo-Saxon sources or to physics sources, you can find the same. We find Lexikon der Physik, worldview of physics, but you must generalize in a most rational and ambitious philosophical program, the sum of the physical theories, physical principle, implicity, effective background beliefs, and inside of philosophical reflection on physics that are valid at a given time, the extent to which a physical worldview is actually understood as a more or less coherent description of the world depends above all on concept of realism and reality, as well on the perspective of physical law. End of quotes. So the Weltbild program, as we can name it, is much more that is a teleologically, that is oriented to the fulfillment or to realization, oriented project of full, complete we will discuss today about completeness, description of phenomenal world by rationality in all its branches. You know the famous image of Descartes as the philosophy or as human knowledge as a tree, okay? Every tree or every branch of this tree contribute to describe a piece or the region of the world, and the systematic convergence of this description will give us, in a way, sort of Weltbild. It's not something formulated in explicit writings. You know, you don't find the writing of Descartes. Maybe you find writings of Leibniz about the Scientia Universalis and so on and so on. But anyway, it's something that is common, shareable feeling of every rationalist and the systematic philosophy of the modern age. A bit less by the empiricists, but this is just another kind of question. By Kant, for example, appears the ideal of omnimoda determinatio, this is complete, full determination of phenomenal world. And by Kant, this ideal is unreachable already. We are 1.5 or almost 2 centuries after Galilei, that's the formulation of science program. We are after Newton, and philosophically, the genius of Kant bring him to say that, okay, we have to pose it as a sort of focus on the horizon, but we cannot attain a full determination of phenomenal world. But it serves to us to orient our scientific practice and our knowledge. Okay? I don't go on Kant, this is my first and beloved stuff, but there is a very huge chapter in the Critique of Pure Reason and an appendix handling with it. Okay? So the omnimoda determinatio, the full, complete scientific determination by synthetic a priori judgment of phenomenal world, is a needle of reason. Okay? But as ideal cannot be reached concretely and serve just to define the perspective. Can't speak on focus or about focus imaginarius, the point that we sketched yesterday, oriented all perspective of our knowledge. But at a certain point, immanently to scientific work and immanently to philosophical tradition, Western tradition, arise negative issues to such program. Okay, you can consider with a relative great margin of approximation that, for example, German idealism is a sort of maximal effort in order to fulfill this idea, encyclopedic idea of knowledge philosophically, or to ground it. The Wissenschaft, the theory of science of Fichte, and system of transcendental idealism of Schelling, as well the famous encyclopedia of philosophical sciences by Hegel, as well the East Late system, are the maximal effort to provide this program and to implement this program also to historical world, okay? But they found many critics, and we can say that already by German idealism, there are many criticisms about the first idea of Mathesis Universalis or Scientia universal mathematics or universal science. This is they emerge, or there are negative issues to such program following the idea of Mathesis Universalis as Scientia Universalis. But let's come to philosophy at first, and then let's sketch how negative issues in science rooted also in a context that was skeptical in a way against that idea of universality. Okay? So, and let's come precisely to the title of our first meeting yesterday, or our second meeting yesterday. This is the idea of modern paradigm as grounded on notion of order and measurement. Okay, ordo sive mensura. How the order and measurement is order and measurement. Order is the ordering of notion corresponding to object, okay, a notion of object, and measurement is the measurement of object, or the positioning of object, is something central by Descartes. We recognize how this central by Descartes by negative way, that is by noticing what is said on Descartes itself. Let's consider Jean-Luc Marion, Descartes' passive thought, that I can here also put in the order. The union of soul and body is imposed by fact and experientially on the res cogitans, this is on the mind, despite the fact that it can be reduced neither to the modes of the cogitatio and to the sequence of reason generating the deduction of ideas on the one hand, first primitive notion, nor to causality which models between them the measures set by the Mathesis Universalis, according to Ordo et Mensura. So, if we will, by Descartes, by Galilei, and by Newton, implicitly by the same thing, establish a universal science of phenomenal world, we have to assume these two notions as fundamental. Ordo, this is methodical order of notion, that's come from analytical method of Descartes. As I say, I have a great problem. I decompose the problem in small parts, analytical method, okay? And then I recompose by having the whole, okay? That is precisely what doesn't work with the modern physics and with the modern logic and so on and so on. Well, say Descartes, I have a problem, subject matter, subjectum. I analyze the notion till analyze the notion to the first notions, and then I recompose and I have the whole. This is analytical solution. Okay? What's happened, and Descartes is very clear about that in the regular fifth rule to the direction of understanding, ordo vel mensura examinato. Let's examine the order and measurement. And the entirety of the method consists in order and disposition of notion. That follows, if you will, the disposition of things in the world. Okay? I reconstruct a word in a picture, in a mental picture. Okay? I segmentate him, and then I reconstruct him following my need to understand clearly and distinctively what the whole is. So if you will, speaking philosophically, the whole depends always on the constitution of the parts. Okay? That is analytical solution, and this work even in mathematics till certain point. Another quotes, we will see that this position is subsumed into the category of order, and one of his expressions, leaving us with a simple relationship of identity between method and order. While this identification of method with order answered the question as to the essence Descartes' method in the regulae, method is order, it begs the question, what is order? Once we grasp Descartes' concept of order in the regulae, we will grasp the meaning of his method and possess, perhaps, the key to the interpretation of this collection of rules. So, the problem is the order is not the ordo naturae, but the ordo naturae as recollected by clear chain of deductive inferences by the mind. Okay? There is a sort of idea, general diffuse idea of stability of the world, one side, that is stable. So once I have identified the problem and assumed to the mind examination, so solius mentis expectio, say Descartes, the problem remains the same, or the phenomenon remains the same. And then the order that I established by my mind, by my logic, by my tools of reasonment, give me access to the understanding on the scientific grasp of the whole, but this remains the same. So at this point, I jump on many passages because it's not a course on modern philosophy, of course. We arrive to another idea that was very strong on Descartes, that is the idea of a universal mechanism. That is, if I can conceive a stable dynamic of phenomenal object, okay, that is just possible if I conceive the world as a huge machine. The so criticized anti-specists, critics on Descartes and so on, and Descartes, but because Descartes says that animals are like machines and so on, that is a reduction of physiology to mechanical process, must be contextualized, of course, okay? We are at the beginning of the new science, and the goal is to clearly understand the dynamics between the parts and the atoms, because Descartes is influenced also by atomism, and so on and so on. It's not a sort of rule of life considering my dog like a machine, okay, or my machine like a dog. It's the same today, so inverted today. But it's sort of purpose. If we will clearly understand what it is happening in the world or happening in nature, we have to reduce our thinking even to an animal like a machine, okay? That is universal mechanism. everything is ruled in the world by mechanic interaction. Okay? Interaction where there are no occult power, there are no soul, no psychological power, just matter, energy, force, and so on, and so on. Mechanism is the belief that natural wholes, principally living things, are similar to complicated machine or artifacts composed of parts lacking any intrinsic relationships to each other. Okay? That is the idea that follows from the idea of order and measurement in order to reach an epistemic goal. Must not necessarily be assumed as a sort of a rule of life, and so on, and so on. It's something that is oriented to a rationalistic goal, knowing better the world by clear and distinct reconstruction of process, by deduction, by laws, and so on, and so on. So the problem is, and then we will consider also a sort of amplification of this idea of universal mechanism by Laplace, that is one of the culmination of mechanism. The French mechanist and determinist Laplace, Pierre-Simon de Laplace, formulated some implication of the mechanist thesis, writing, "We may regard the present state of the universe as the effect of the past and the cause of the future." Okay? That is what we need in order to think a clock. Okay? The state of a clock comes from the previous state of a clock and anticipate next state of a clock. Okay? Machine is the same. Everything is a huge machine or a part of a huge machine. An intellect, the demon of Laplace, so-called demon of Laplace, it is a postulation. Of course, we human, we cannot reach this status. An intellect which at any given moment knew all of the forces that animates nature and the mutual position of being that compose it, if this intellect were was now to submit the data to analysis, could condense into a single formula the movement of the greatest bodies of the universe and that of the lightest atom. This is, if you will, what circulate still today in this denomination, the formula of everything. Okay? This is very strong rationalistic assumption, postulated, that we postulate that sufficient, this is global information of every state can reduce every happening in the world to a formula by which we can deduce every future state. Okay? There is a very, very enigmatic vision, but it's very clear. That is, if we simplify, let's use this, to reduce, if we reduce the whole phenomenal world, okay, to an idea of simple extension, quantities, forces, and so on, everything measurable mathematically, okay? We can even think an universal mechanism so that with enough information and so on, we can think a formula of everything. It's a sort of cinematic presentation, but it is in sort of superstition of rationalism, okay? Yes?
Sir, this idea of measuring the universe, how do we situate, like for example, if we want to understand a fan, we can...
and hand.
Fan. This.
Okay.
This fan. If
Yeah.
you want to understand this fan, we can undress it, like remove its parts and constituents, and then we can understand. But can we understand a social world by like understanding a material world?
That's the question. That's the question why German idealism also, and precisely Hegel, criticizes strongly this vision.
And also in this measuring of exact finitude, for example, if you want to measure a coastline, if our standard and yardstick is 1 meter, our measurement will be, for example, if you measure a coastline 7,000 kilometers. But if our yardstick is 0.1 meter,
That is a question of measurement. The problem is the cost. You know, maybe you asked the question because the first pioneeristic writings on fractal geometries from Mandelbrot was how it's along the coast of Great Britain. But we will arrive at that. There is a program that I underlined that we have not to overestimate the things and accuse those men to have formulated sort of vision of the evil as well. But this is a scientific rationalistic program, okay? Already, not only Hegel, but already a great philosopher of the modern age, Giambattista Vico, has criticized the Cartesian view. Huh? Gadamer. No, Gadamer come later. This is with Giambattista Vico, was in the 17th century. So there is not. It was clear to many people that such word could, in the best case, orient science, okay, and not represent a sort of reachable goal. But if you have to do with human phenomena, it's not working. Or you assume a sort of strong atomistic, reductionistic vision of humankind. It cannot work. Even history cannot be interpretable by that, and so on and so on. But is this something leading at least the first phase of modern philosophy and modern civilization? Okay, sort of this idea of omnimodal determinatio. This is at least, like by Kant, for the phenomenal world, we can reach a sort of full determination of phenomenal world. Even by Kant, that is not the case, because then there is the phenomenon of beauty that cannot intrinsically be described by that. There is a teleology that are organisms that cannot be described by that, and then the practical realm of ethics that cannot be described by that. Okay, but what I would suggest is that this idea of completeness, okay, or the reachable complete determination by a sort of universal powerful tool like mathematics or mathesis universalis, move forward knowledge and move forward philosophy till a certain point. Okay? If you will, there is a whole, we have also a scholar that's working on it, there is a whole movement coming from Goethe philosophy of nature in the late 17th and beginning of 19th century, okay? That is the Goethe Naturphilosophie that say it's fake. Let's think that is Goethe was not only one of the greatest writers of our mankind, but also sort of observer of nature, and says or writes essays in clear opposition to Newton theory of color, for example, or to Newton or Newtonian Galilean paradigm of conceiving nature. So the criticism arise immanently to the rise and open from rationalists, but criticism arises. And what they say, narrative or not, is that when the negative issues come to manifestation, okay, there are many criticisms on it, because we have a radicalization of this view, and Laplace is the radicalization. But we have also enlargement of philosophical problems that cannot be reduced to such frame of matrices universalis. For example, the idea of self-emancipation of mankind in history happened by the French Revolution in the West Europe, to which the German idealist was very, very sensible. But what I will suggest is that no, we cannot explain, we cannot even not explain a gas. We will come further to it. We can explain, so the radical change, like the change between Galilean relativity and Einstein relativity, or universal mechanism by Descartes and modern physics, at the beginning we think that we can explain almost everything or everything with it. And at a certain point we become aware that it's a tool to describe very small local mesoscopic phenomena. Okay, but that is, will be the discussion after. Let me reach the point. Because what is the point? What is the point philosophically? The point is we can think all that once having stabilized the relation that we have to the object. So the central point that it comes not into discussion because it's Descartes metaphysics and modern theory of knowledge, that is the relation between subject and object. What Heidegger called subject-object relation, Subjekt. This relation, that is every form of relation to something external, okay, is supposed or taken for granted to be stable. Okay? I repeat what I said before. If I take a problem, there's a subject matter, an object, and I will explain how the whole of the object is made. I divide into the part. I can even study the relation among the part. Of course, I don't describe the relation among the part. I take, so I need a relation, I submit this relation to a general law, and then I extend this general law to all the parts. But the object, what I have to describe, remains the same. Okay? That is, when I have abstracted from something to study and assumed to thinking, I'm sure that that word to which this something belongs is the same, follows the same roots, is not an illusion, is not a dream, okay? It's not a dream. If you consider that philosophically, we are brought back to Descartes and to the metaphysical meditation. Many people that don't have the capacity to read 2 pages of Descartes say, Descartes is an anti-realist. He thinks really that the world is an illusion, and so on and so on. It's not that true, okay? Descartes was a man of arms, a military, working on the fields of world of battle and not in the academies, and it was very, very realistic for the life. But the mise en scène, the scenario of the Cartesian, the metaphysical meditation, serve us to say what guarantee us that the world that we are assuming on science is not changing in between. Where can I find the certitude that the world follows sort of stable becoming? Okay? It's why Descartes writes the Cartesian, the Meditationes de Prima Philosophia, is to give a foundation to the elementary structure of our knowledge, that is the stability between the object and this erkennende Subjekt, that is the knowing subject. This is the real postulate, okay? That the world is not changing in between, that we have from on our mind a sort of class of notion that let us capable to describe such stability once for all. That is the metaphysical postulate. Okay? Or as Schrödinger says, transcendental postulate. Okay? That is something that does not appear by scientific issues, something that belongs to philosophy and, as I mentioned before, to first philosophy. Okay? So first philosophy by Descartes, metaphysics by Leibniz serves other purposes. But anyway, serve at first to give a foundation to knowledge as such. By stabilizing once for all the relation that we have to the object. We must be sure that the object in between does not change their laws. That is, that there is no emergence of new patterns of nature, spoken in a complex worldview, okay? And that our notion are capable even to think the possibility of a universal determination by the same procedures, okay? On this presupposition is grounded the idea of word picture. Okay? Presupposition on the side, would they say, of the mind. That is, we have a sort of package of rules that agented themselves let us describe fully the world. Powerful tools like algebra, mathematics, logic, and so on and so on. All the same, very, very ergonomic, and so on and so on. And the other side, we must be sure that the structure of external world does not change. Because instead, every science is what? Is not performative. It performs at the same level, but is not ultimately funded on something. That is the idea of metaphysics in modern philosophy. If we don't secure the relation between subject and object, if we can have a doubt about the emergence of something new in the world, not responding to the same laws, if you are uncertain on our power to describe the world geometrically, we cannot pretend that our knowledge is ultimately grounded. Okay? That is, we have not the ultimate certainty of the objectivity of our science. Okay? That is important because many people overestimate at one time and underestimate. I don't say criticize. The rationality is open to every criticism. Okay? Rationalism is open to every criticism. But underestimate and overestimate on the other sides what are the presuppositions of rationalism and modern science. Okay? On the one side, by saying, but this is just an idea coming from philosopher, for example, Descartes, thinking that, or the presupposing that the world is an illusion. No, if you read Cartesian meditation after having readden the whole scientific world, you understand that that presupposition is necessary, okay? It's genial, but anyway, it's necessary to fulfill the new science or the new rationalism by an ultimate foundation, okay? That is to stabilize the relation of knowledge between subject and object, okay? On the other side, overestimate by thinking that once posed this relation, every rationalist philosophy or every people pertaining to rationalist philosophy must accept that as a dogma. It's not a dogma. Rationalism erase or consume its own dogma from inner. Okay? Now we know, independently from what we will see in few minutes, that such stabilization is full of problems. Full of problems. Because it's a metaphysical foundation that depends ultimately, till Kant, at last, from the supposition of a certain nature of God. So is in a certain way a theological foundation. What Kant calls ontotheology. Okay? Without the notion of God, a perfect God that creates the man and then with a certain notion and the capacity of knowing a stable world, move it once for all, we can have the ultimate certitude of our knowledge. Okay? By Kant, for what concerns theory of knowledge, there is no longer God that guarantees, okay, the stability of evidence, but there is sort of huge presupposition. Okay? For example, the presupposition that this package of notion, okay, this is our logic, formal logic, is complete. Or the presupposition that space and time are Euclidean, isomorph, and so on, and so on. Okay? There are sort of presupposition not depending from theology, but depending from psychology. Okay? So it's just a matter of science and physics. Not really, because science is led or laden by strong metaphysical presupposition. Of course, the theology of Descartes, the theology, the deontotheological approach of Spinoza or Leibniz are not the Christian or are just tangentially the Christian. But there is a sort of theology that is nothing to do with evidence of knowledge. So, evidence is searched by knowledge, but anyway, the presupposition that a God exists and the demonstration of the existence of God a priori is not self-evident. Far from being self-evident, will be criticized. Okay? This is, Kant, in the Critique of Pure Reason, formulates very well the problem by mentioning this notion that divinity als mediator, Gottheit zur Vermittlung. Or without intermediary or the intermediation of God, the ontotheology of previous rationalism cannot guarantee the ultimate foundation of knowledge. Okay? Without, let's go to Hegel or to German idealism retrospectively, critically on Kant, without presupposing huge notions or the huge things about our mind constitution, that is, that we have just two form of intuition, pure form of intuition, space and time, that we have just 12 categories and schemata and so on and so on, we cannot give a foundation of knowledge. Okay? So it's a matter of first philosophy, the ultimate foundation of knowledge. And what the criticism, the rationalist or the philosophical criticism, against this vision let emerge is that the play is more complex as we can think. And as we will see by Heidegger, that sort of presuppositions or the scientific presupposition of Mathesis Universalis in the modern age emerge from a larger context of mankind and approach to the world. Let's shift precisely to this problematization. Science is no more science and meditation, is no more a cultural activity of man than is art. Science is one way, and indeed one decisive way, in which all that it presents itself to us. Therefore, we must say, the reality within which man of today moves and attempts to maintain himself is, with regard to its fundamental characteristic, determined on an increasing scale by and in conjunction with that which we call Western European science in a global scale. Okay, not only in the European scale, in a global scale. When we ponder this ongoing event, it becomes evident that in the Western world and during the eras of its history, science has developed such a power as could never ever been met with on the earth before, and that consequently this power is ultimately to be spread over the entire globe. By what? By the technique that is strictly inherent to the modern science since the beginning. Okay? In order that this state of affairs may come into view for us, however, there must be adequate clarity about what science is. But how shall we come to know that? Most surely it seems simply by describing the scientific enterprise of our day, as I could do by, for example, explaining what complexity science is. Okay? It would be very, very easier, even for you, maybe, that I scroll slides on different notion of complexity, and then everyone can make his own view. Okay? But it's a bit superficial. Okay? We have to retrace the emergence to the roots. Such a presentation could show how, for a long time, even more decisively, and at the same time even more unobtrusively, the science have been intersecting in all organizational forms of modern life. In industry, in commerce, in education, in politics, in warfare, in journalism of all kinds. To be acquainted with this intersect is important. In order to be able to give an exposition of it, however, we must first have experienced that in which the essence of science lies. This may be expressed in a concise statement, and Heidegger here speak about modern science. Okay? Science is the theory of the real. Okay? If we go, for example, to the previous slides, it's matter about realism. Okay? But the problem is that in order to think such a science that is the theory Okay? Science is the theory. And what is important is not only theory here, but the singular, the theory of the real. Okay? That's depend not from scientists, of course, dependent on a program by which science lead not only particular issue of scientific life, but sort of becoming of mankind. Okay? So I bit critical. So even when I had the chair that was before of Ursula and Heidegger, I was a bit critical about sort of ultra-conservative and reactionary approach to science of Heidegger, okay? But if you will, the difference between a sort of analytic Taliban and a non-analytic Taliban is that we can hear also voice that does not sound good for us. So Heidegger let us notice things that even refined, even criticized are very, very important for thinking our world today and how science and technology dominates not only the public sphere but our lives, okay? Till the point to arrive, just a moment, till the point to arrive to think about a sort of tyranny of scientism. Yes?
What difference will it make if the statement would be like science is a theory of the world?
Yeah, that's
Not the theory.
that is the strong presupposition led by the modern science and this sort of foundational program. That is, of course, the question is very, very legitimate. We can have two answers to this question. One is very, very mitigate and is, in my view, is the most possible lucid answer. That is not the only theory of the real, but it is the only theory, we said yesterday before, that is shareable from everyone. I put a problem on the table, and everyone can say if it is good, solved, or not. Does not belong to personal, communitarian revelation of divinity, beliefs, and so on, and so on. So that is a mitigate answer. It's not the one theory of the real, but it's the one theory that can be shareable by everyone. That's the problem is that by the metaphysical presupposition of the modern age, the science is not the one theory that is shareable, is the one things that can be described the world as such. And you know that there is a step forwards. There is something that does not belong to science, that belongs to metaphysics. Yes? Loud? Yeah?
How do you define the problem of necessity?
Necessity.
Yeah, like if everything that is shareable can qualify as scientific knowledge, then there are problems or kinds of knowledge which are tacit in their nature. There are very live examples for that also. How do we still keep it in the domain of science?
No, I don't come in play till now. There was an open field of philosophical work that is how keep necessity in the, for the moment is how this man or those men will keep necessity, and there is precisely the problem that science is the theory of the real is because it is the one theory that, if you will, shows that things must happen with necessity. If I follow Laplace, okay, the general presupposition of Laplace of a world mechanism, if I have sufficient information of the previous state and the adequate laws ruling the phenomenon, the cause follows necessarily from the previous state. Okay?
The way you're describing it, it will become deterministic.
But it's not my description, it's their description.
But that's not how science actually is emerging. In the current form, the science is emerging.
But we are not still at the current form. Of course, the current form put in question this strong metaphysical idea. You're right. It was an ancient idea of science, but it's not still valid. This is neither my idea of science, neither the today understanding of science. But what is important is between our idea of science and an idea of science, we have to look how this awakening of the doubt about absolute necessity and so on arise. And we come precisely to the foundational crisis of science.
Yes, but just one, I mean, if you were to contextualize Heidegger's conception of science,
If you are will to contextualize,
Heidegger's conception of science,
Yeah.
where does it come from? Because, well, I mean, we've learned from historical epistemology that you can't speak of science in the ever-present tense, right? So, which science is Heidegger speaking of?
you think, do you think Jan Hacking, historical epistemologies?
Yeah, that,
Yeah,
yeah.
I'm nourished fully before. Yeah, very good questions. And so to contextualize, Heidegger, when speak about science or Wissenschaft, speak always about modern science. When he must talk about the science of the ancient, speak often of episteme. This is a huge different thing. Okay, so science as coded by the West, the early modern, it what we call science, no longer today, but it was called at the beginning of the 20th century science. There is no other science. And for this reason, to claim that the science is the theory of the real is depending on a strong, non-evident metaphysical presupposition. What Heidegger criticized, maybe in order to go in another complete opposite direction as mine, but anyway, it's right. Okay? That is the idea that the science is the theory led by necessity of statements of the real.
The word I used was tacit, not tacit. Tacit.
That's it.
Tacit knowledge.
Polanyi's idea of tacit knowledge.
That's it.
T-A-C-I-T, tacit. That which is not formalizable.
Ah, okay.
Science also contains knowledge which is not formalizable, right?
There's another kind of problem.
Cannot be transferred.
Yeah. There's another kind of problem. This not can be formalized or put into computation. Yeah.
Can be done with the experiment, but cannot be transferred.
Just a
It can be
moment.
transferred, but by other ways, not by formalizable ways.
Yeah, not by, so, for example, rocket science happens to be one of the prime examples how once Russians started the space program and after a certain point they wanted to restart it.
I agree, but let's go methodically a bit slowly, okay? No, I answered the question. So the problem is that presupposition has nothing to do with the scientific practice. You know, it's belonged to metaphysics. It's a strong metaphysical presupposition. And if you're right, strong ontological presupposition. That is, we have to have a conception of being so shaped that the science can uniform it by formulas and so on and so on. So in a way, and Heidegger is right to pretending that then is anchoring to a mechanism like ontologic difference is not so clear. There is a sort of one epoch of the world in which we can pretend that science is the theory of the real. Okay? And this depends from metaphysics, from metaphysical presupposition, and if we will historicize the metaphysics, then it's historical. This comes from an historical becoming. From evinements, as you say yesterday, from contacts about civilization, from things that I had never taken into account, but anyway, it's historical. And as historical as its end, as we will see. People presenting the science as, or informatics or technology as the science or description of the real are already speaking from a metaphysical point of view, not from scientific point of view. Okay? Because there is, we have to do with an holistic claim, at first unifying branches of science that not necessarily must be or will be unified together, and then presupposing more tacitly that the world let describe itself from a sort of theory of it that is most metaphysical. Okay? So that the statement, science is theory of the real, holds neither for the science of the Middle Age, let's say it, nor for that of antiquity. Medieval doctrine is as essentially different from theory of the real, as this is different when contrasted with the episteme of the ancient. This is one idea that began in the modern age and ends at a certain point for immanent and transcendent motives on science itself. Because it's not matter of scientific practice, it's matter of a word conception. So, bit completing what we said, science, this is not Heidegger, it's me, is pretended to be in such worldview, as a teleologically self-completing theory of the real, is the key feature of modern metaphysics inaugurated by Descartes, to the pristine idea of Maetesis Universalis based on the concept of ordo and mensura. That's what we can say about that. And then let's come to Heidegger, the age of word picture, in which Heidegger confronts itself with the modern science. Physics in general, the knowledge of nature, and in particular the knowledge of material corporeality in its motion. For example, even that is modern and is historical. In the Middle Age, it's not the case. For that corporeality manifests itself immediately and universally in everything natural, everything, even if a variety of ways. If physics takes shape explicitly, then as something mathematical, this means that, in an especially pronounced way, through it and for it, something is stipulated in advance as what is already known. That stipulating has to do with nothing less than the plan of projection of that which must be henceforth for the knowing of nature that is sought after be nature. The self-contained system of motion of units of mass related spatiotemporally into this ground plane of nature are supplied in keeping with its prior stipulation. The following definition, among others, have been incorporated. Motions mean change of place, as said yesterday. No motion or direction of motion is superior to any other. Homogenization of a universal mechanism. Every force is defined according to its only its consequence in motion, and that means in magnitude of change of place in the unit of time. Every event must be seen so as to be fitted into this ground plan or master plan, ground plan of nature. Only within the perspective of this ground plan does an event in nature become visible as such an event. That is not what Heidegger thinks about nature, is what modern science thinks about nature, and that's, you can see, is very coherent with what we sketched since yesterday, okay? Modern science with tools, with practice, or the modern sciences with tools, with practices, with assumption, are included in a huge project to describe the master plan or the ground plan of nature. What happens after? So, if a such vision is so strong, if a such vision is so evident, okay, we have no doubt about the possibility to fulfill the project. Okay? So, why we have something like a foundational debate on science? What happened in between? Happened what we will see, that the science itself rebel itself to this metaphysical idea. So immanently to rationalism, we think things, or that we discover things that place themselves in strong contradiction with this plan. Okay? And from that contradiction arise our complex world. Okay? So people say, but what scientists, of course, very, very erudite and so on, thinks that the foundational debate in science is just a local moment of evolution of science. And from the point of view of scientific practice, it's right. As we will see, mathematics after the foundational crisis of science is not weaker as the mathematics before, is even stronger. Or physics after the affirmation of the impossibility to unify physics is not weaker as the physics before, is even stronger. Then we have new science, cybernetics, informatics, and so on, thermodynamics. So the problem of foundational debate, or what foundational debates on science taking place from the from the middle of 19th century to the middle of 20th century destroy is not science. It's the metaphysics that was leading that science to a unique idea of worldview. Okay? So let's begin from the first scandal for science and even for mathematicians, non-Euclidean geometry. So, just in order to explain that, you can today estimate why non-Euclidean geometry is so scandalous for a scientist at the middle or the middle of the 19th century, after the middle of the 19th century, or at the beginning of the 20th century. For us, it's something acceptable. Why it's so scandalous? But for Frege, it was a delirium. Gottlob Frege defined in a letter the non-Euclidean geometries as a delirium. Okay? And then, now you will experience one thing personally. So you will experience that your vision transforms itself without scandal, and just your pretension to have a stable approach to nature will destroy. There's a sort of growth in the sense of world understanding. As you know, maybe non-Euclidean geometry were formulated by many people. Carl Friedrich Gauss. This is one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, already studied about it. Then we have to do with Lobachevsky. They wrote a sort of book, Pan Geometry, Lost in Siberia, in the late 19th century, or in the end of the 19th century. And then we have the genius that is Bernhard Riemann, to which Gauss asked to write an habilitation schrift, which all German professors, me include, have to write in order to become professor. And this young man give us, and if you will, I have to search the lesson on English translated, you can find by Springer, über die Hypothesen, welche der Geometrie zugrunde liegen. That is, on the hypothesis that lies at the ground of geometry. Okay? Just a small habilitation writing of a young professor in Göttingen that changed many things at the same time. Now you can say, why is so important? Okay? How to react to these issues? So that, you know what is non-Euclidean geometry? Of course. Do you know? No. So let's, now we go in a many performative manner. But starting always by which we said yesterday, not by chance. So, yesterday we saw that perspective can order things in this way, mathematically, and so on, okay? And then we know what is the relationship between, okay, between that way to represent object and that way to represent every form of nature in a many-dimensional structure, okay? But what Descartes says, that is that could be by dimension, we can conceive force, weight, and so on, presupposes one thing that Riemann in this lecture underlines very, very radically. Presuppose, or every Euclidean geometry, presuppose that that line, that axis, that dimension, are rectilinear. Okay? You know, you can say, okay, but what? How can I conceive a dimension of space that is not a line, a straight line? Okay? If I consider, for example, a book or a computer, I can straight the lines and I have the 3 dimension. If I consider a cube, if I consider everything in our visible world, okay, is 3 dimension and linear. Why I should conceive or I should abandon this view to conceive monsters like other forms of space? And Riemann says, because that presupposition lies, okay, on the ground of our perception. There is not a mathematical evidence per se. Okay? That we have a space with 3 linear straight linear dimension and not curvilinear dimension is just a presupposition. It's not true. So the dimension of the res extensa of Kant, the res extensa of Descartes, or the dimension of the Newton physics lies geometrically on a naive presupposition. Thus the space is the space that we perceive in our mesoscopic world. Okay? So how to react to these issues? Many scientists at the time react in this way. No. A responsible adult says no to non-Euclidean space. Okay? Because it's responsible and must ground physics on a certain kind of evidence. What evidence could we have with a sort of plurality of monsters, topological monsters, with space at 7 dimension, curvilinear, elliptical, and so on, and so on. That is, if you will, decisive, because that chase us from the implicit, pre-scientific connection between our world perception and the geometry that underlines it, and the mathematics that underlines it. This is a shock, a civilizational shock, if you will, okay? Because what we can deny but the linearity of space, okay? Every object at 3D dimension. The depth, the length, and the weight. This is so trivial that is the the first interest to read philosophically this lecture of Riemann, okay? That Riemann says, no, there is no evidence. We transfer to mathematics what comes from our intuition, empirical intuition. It is not legitimate. This is not pertinent to mathematics itself, okay? Ex principio, we can conceive an infinite variety of spaces that are not only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as a dimensional, as Descartes always said by algebra, but also linear, curvilinear, hyperbolic, and so on, and so on. For this reason, Frege says, oh my God, this is a delirium. Frege is the responsible man, okay? They say no to Euclidean geometry. But what is important for us is that brings to a general, very, very interesting debate. What are the foundations of mathematics and geometry? Okay? If you consider the title, you have to consider this Zugrunde, at the ground. Okay? So, if intuition, like Kant presupposed, okay, our form of intuition is tridimensional, Euclidean, and linear. It belongs to our being to think that, or to intuition that thinks that. If there is no more valid, what is the ground, the ultimate ground of geometry and mathematics? For this reason, we speak about the foundational debate in mathematics. Okay? Or the foundational crisis in mathematics. Be very, very cool. After that, mathematics not only survives, but go faster and faster with great achievements without an ultimate foundation. Okay? So, don't affect at all mathematics and geometry, and on the contrary, accelerate mathematics and geometry in a new horizon that you could never imagine. Okay? And what is the reason of that questioning? If intuition, okay, our intuition of continuity does no longer correspond to its rendering by mathematical tools. So if mathematics and geometry are not longer the same things because we cannot reduce continuity to discrete quantities, what can be, or what's about this foundational debate? Foundational debate concerned, of course, and then we come to Gödel incompleteness and so on and so on, concern to find the ultimate notions, okay, letztendliche Notionen, on which mathematics and then following geometry can be grounded. Okay? Like for the non-Euclidean geometry, humanity has even had the feelings that it was not very well working. Why? Because since the formulation of the fifth Euclid postulate, many people asked on the validity of this postulate, because the postulate bring us to conceive the dimension as linear and orthogonal, okay? So, and from the same time, at the beginning of the Greek culture, the middle, in a very huge crisis of the Greek culture, people discovered, like Titus, maybe you have already heard from Titus? You have already heard from Titus, from Plato, okay? The same Theaetetus and Theodorus that appears in Dialogue for Plato about knowledge, about episteme, because the Theaetetus dialogue is named episteme, on science, discovered something like that. You know what it is? Huh? Irrational number. What is an irrational number? Now even a child can compute an irrational number. Why is this irrational? Huh? Okay, there is no ratio between two numbers able to fix with precision the quantity announced it. The diagonal of the square, okay? That is, if you have to calculate that, I found that there is no ratio, for this reason, is no logos, no relationship between two discrete quantities that can express the exact quantity of the thing, okay? That comes from the geometry and early Greeks, okay? There was a scandal also because Plato was shocked about it and tempted, would they say, to abandon the theory of ideas and forced to redevelop another theory of ideas. So it lies at the ground of metaphysics, not only to geometry and so on and so on. But mathematicians can deal with it since antiquity without problems, okay? So, as they can deal with linear geometry without grasping the ultimate evidence of the fifth postulate of Euclid. Euclid postulate, they deal with it and no problem. So the problem of non-Euclidean geometry let arise, of course, the problem about continuity and continuum and discretum. So if geometry, I make it simple because we have still things to say. If geometry can no longer lies on the ground of our mesoscopical intuition, okay? What is the foundation of geometry? Okay? Welche sind die Grundlagen der Geometrie? Of course, we refer the geometry to arithmetic, and then eventually, like Bertrand Russell or Gottlob Frege, we refer arithmetic to logic. But that's a classic step, okay? So the problem is that if we can't, okay, if we are unable to explain mathematically what an irrational number is, that's arises the problem. Then arise the huge phases of set theory, okay? That is, how we can establish a biunivocal correspondence between a member of a natural number with a member of or rational number. That is a clear ratio between two natural numbers, okay? With an element of irrational numbers, okay? At a certain point comes Georg Cantor. There says that that is very tripping, what they say, puzzling, that let's remember Galilei yesterday, that the infinity of irrational numbers is more infinite as the infinity of natural numbers. You can say, wait, how an infinity can be more infinite as another infinity, okay? We discover the cardinality of infinity by this Jew symbol, the Aleph, that was the cipher of God in the ancient religion, okay? And then we know that natural number and rational number are Aleph, though, that is, wir haben eine transfinite cardinality, but real number, to which irrational number belongs, are another cardinality. Complex numbers are another cardinality, and so on. We have many infinities among numbers. And it's impossible to reduce this infinity to this infinity. For this reason, we talk about foundational crisis, because we become aware by set theory, the theory of sets, that this set is more potent than this set, and there is no biunequivocal correspondence between those elements. They are infinite, both, but one is more infinite than the other. It means that geometry is not reducible to mathematics or to arithmetics, okay? And then maybe arithmetics is not reducible to logic, okay? There is another step. We say, let's say, okay, we have certain problem arising for our intuition of continuum and discretum, but anyway, this is the presupposition of modern rationalism. In our mind, there is a sort of set of logical rules that are perfectly coherent, fixed, and self-evident. Okay? So there is another, this program to ultimate foundation was announced by the great mathematician David Hilbert. The Hilbert program was actually a specific approach for proving consistency of not just local proof, but mathematical, meta-theoretical and mathematical proofs. Quantifiers were supposed to be replaced by epsilon terms. It's just a bit complex. I can also send you a paper for people that I'm interested for. But what is the juice of the thing? That Hilbert says, Hilbert was a very old-fashioned rationalist, a genius, a rebel, but a very old rationalist. We have to develop a structure of a cartography of mathematics by which we can ultimately decide if problems are solvable or unsolvable in this frame. Okay? Then comes the young man Kurt Gödel that say, no, without logic even potentiated to the logic of first order, there are problems or there are statements, formulas, that cannot be proved even as internal to the system. This is the incompleteness problem. For this reason, maybe Saul Kripke, that is one of the most, has died 2 or 3 years ago, analytical logicians of our time, write this paper that I had. If you are interested, I can send to you. Saul Kripke, The Collapse of Hilbert Program, a variation on a Gödelian theme. This is what Gödel, by willing potentiate the rationalism of Principia Mathematica of Russell, I make it short, find is that there is something like a black spot in our logic that cut coherence from truth to each other. So a theory can be coherent, but it cannot absolute valid or self-evident because there are propositions inside, etc., etc. Okay? And as I said before yesterday, on this invention, Turing will elaborate computing machine that brings you to a computer and artificial intelligence. But not the end of the story. You don't hear? What?
Couldn't hear that. Inaudible, sir. Can you repeat that?
You cannot hear what? The whole lecture?
Last part. Just the last part. Last part.
But it's not the end of the story. It's not the end. That is what I said. It's not the end of the story.
From Turing.
Huh?
You said something from Turing.
So Turing applying this discovery of Gödel will bring to computing machine, because it applies the recursive primitive function, and then it will bring us to today artificial intelligence and informational revolution or computing revolution. Okay? But this is not the end of the story. That is, we have not still problems that arise. And one problem, I mentioned the first day, is the problem of interaction of three bodies. If you can remark the first, you know the first formula? Okay? The first formula is Newton's gravitational law. Okay? So, that is very, very puzzling, because the three-body problem was already known even in the early modern. Okay? But anyway, what makes Poincaré is to say, if there's a general formula or general ruling gravitational dynamics, if I put an M3, so a third body with a mass, I can be able to calculate the system. Okay? If you will, is not trivial, but it's curious. We have the claim of a universal law, but if we transform the formula for two bodies in a formula for three bodies, we can't. So with three bodies, we have a kind of different results. How will three masses move in space if the only force on them is their mutual gravitational attraction? Is the formulation of how can I compute this formula for M1, M2, and M3? It's simple. So if I write if I take only two bodies, I have the Newton formula. If I take the three bodies, I must have, under the presupposition of rational calculus and universal mechanism, in a way, a formula that enables me to calculate or to compute. Why should don't work for three bodies when it's working for two bodies? That's a very, very genial question. Okay? Now, the problem is that don't work. It don't work. Don't work formally, and then it shows that there is sort of deterministic chaos installed in a system at the very, very early moment of the interaction. That is, the presupposition independently, like Gödel, independently from metaphysics, independently from theology, independently from philosophical speculation, okay? We know for certain that our logic is not complete with finitistic method. We suppose the infinite, we fall still in metaphysics and so on and so on. But anyway, we know for certain this is a negative issue, this is a very positive for all us. We know for certain that this idea that the logic is the clearest strongest tool to analyze the world, in order to analyze the world, is not complete. Okay? No, this idea is false, because logic is not complete. It don't mean that it cannot be applied to a machine in order to computate many things. But the truth is something different from the coherence of logical computation. Here we know that a formula like a general formula of gravitation pose problem just by including in the computation a third body. And by this inclusion, we discover something other. Discover that even in deterministic processes, because we have deterministic chaos and stochastic chaos, even in deterministic processes could take place chaotic phases. What for us is, if you will, archetypal paradox. Why? Because cosmos, in the old Greek language, means order. So now we have a cosmic law, gravitation, but with three corps, we discovered something other, deterministic chaos. And then we can go further, because it's not the end of the story. Thermodynamics. I let you explore the things. That is, in a universal machine, I will be very short because they announced me in 10 minutes or 8-minute break. You could be very, very tired. So, in the general presupposition of mechanism, okay, of the modern age, okay, the quantity of energy remains the same. What it means that if transform warmth in energy, like in a locomotive, okay, based on my metaphysical presupposition of the universal mechanism, I can retransform the energy in warmth. Okay? There is a sort of convertibility. When it's always the same, I can transform one thing in one other thing and then retransform. No, thermodynamics shows that there is no possible. There is a system in which such reversibility is impossible. It means, so if I take a watch, okay, the mechanism in this watch makes so that the lancet runs, okay? I stop the watch, I make an opposite force, and I will find the lancet precisely where they were before. So it's perfectly reversible because it's a machine, okay? If I have a piston in a motor, the piston is broken, I replace the piston, but the mechanism is still the same, okay? In nature is not that mechanism. Or the nature is not shaped at that mechanism. Now cannot be retraced from the before. Because there are processes that are cannot reversible. Okay? That's happened. Why is it so important? Because if we talk about the crisis of modern view just from philosophical point of view, we can fall in opinatory thesis. Okay, that can be true, that can be false, on which presupposition. There are no presupposition here. There are just discoveries that shows that the metaphysical presupposition of a ordered, full ordered, mechanic world does not work. And that our intelligence is not so shaped as a computing machine going by algorithms. Okay? That's our discovery. It's completely neutral from the point of view of metaphysics. because the people are scientists, that showed to us all that the world is not that simple world that we presume to be at the beginning of the rise of science and technology in the modern age. The world is other, or the something other. And then we have no longer to believe that science in singular, okay, is the theory in singular of the real, okay? Because that idea of science, science in singular as the theory in singular of the real in singular, okay, collapses by this evidence. What we call the negative issues in foundational science are not negative of all for us, are negative for people claiming, pretending that the nature, human world, man, and so on, let capture themselves by simple linear processes ruled by a simple linear reasonment. Okay? In this way, our mind can be prepared as tomorrow to accept the idea of complexity of certain phenomena. Because there is not a fact of opinatory speculation of philosophy, of philosophers. In general, philosophers that have opinatory speculation are bad philosophers. But anyway, it's a matter of evidence that the nature is a mechanism is now not pursuit of evidence. So, it's a metaphysical presupposition that our logic is the most powerful tool and clearest tool for describing the world in its completeness is false, but it is itself incomplete. I present just a bit so superficially, but that is what this phase shows, that this is the world that we have to describe and wherein we have to live is not so simple as a machine or as a huge watch made by a watcher. Watchmaker, sorry. Yeah. Watchmaker who gives the start and then the things rule by themselves without oscillation, without chaos, and without variation. Okay? Then let's make a break and we can discuss in detail this. Thank you.
So by the time Heidegger produces his critique of his metaphysical critique of science, I mean, science itself has already changed, so it's not relevant to that critique, right?
Can you ask the question after?
Yeah.
You said me?
We try to be back by 4:50.
Questions? Yeah?
Just a curiosity that I want to share, that prior to like non-Euclidean kind of a geometry, there was a simplified way of like, because there was no irrational number. So
Please?
Because
No, start from the beginning.
Okay. It's just a curiosity that I'm sharing, because maybe I didn't fully understand what you were trying to say. It's a very new thing for me also, philosophy of science. So before that introduction of this irrational number or the certain inherent complexity that was emerging within mathematics and geometry. Prior to that, there was a kind of metaphysical presupposition of understanding reality or the real, capturing the real through science, and having this kind of a overarching claim of like getting to understand the real. But after this new non-Euclidean geometry, the science and geometry itself developed through its own complexities, like set system and all those things. So, but still the claim is to understand the real through it, through this complex mathematical and geometrical system. How would like you say that? Is it like still true for us to understand the real through maths and mathematics and geometry? Is it possibility? There is a possibility to do this?
Yeah. So the question is, we have 10 lectures, and the advantage is not to go short, but to go slow and straight to the point. Non-Euclidean geometry, strictly speaking, not too much to do with complexity directly. So that there are many possible non-Euclidean geometry is not a proof for complexity of something. It's just the proof that once we hypostatize one form of space, or one forms of logic, one forms of dynamical interaction, one, etc., often we are wrong. So what non-Euclidean geometry determined is the process of a deeper and clearer questioning about the relationship between geometry and arithmetics or mathematics that bring to the consciousness that our logic is not complete. You know, there is complexity in non-Euclidean geometry. That is sort of superstition. There is nothing complex in non-Euclidean geometries, okay? But that breaks, if you will, is a sort of breakthrough in our way, if you will, natural, to hypostatize our forms of perceiving or our form of reasoning as the unique general form by which the world manifests to ourselves. Okay? For this reason, there was a shock not for mathematicians. For example, Einstein, using models and non-Euclidean geometry of Tullio Levi-Civita, discovered the general relativity. Is the problem for those that think that one single shape of our scientific production can reduce everything to the simple, okay, or everything to one endable element, you know. So the importance of history of philosophy or history of science is that nothing is so easy as it appears. For example, I studied yesterday till 2 o'clock trying to find papers about entropy and complexity, and you can find everything, okay, even about geometry and complexity. Because when the people don't have the force and the will to go patiently, step by step, to the phase of evolution of emergence of complex system, take one thing or to say is good or to say is bad, okay? So I will never say that non-Euclidean geometry is directly linked or that shows in itself a complexity, but show it to us with a form to conceive and to describe the world, that our hypostases are often false, because it's not a matter of a mathematician before this course, if someone went to you and asked, how many dimensional space? What are the dimensional space? You can sketch this tridimensional orthogonal space. So it's something inscribed in us by education, inscribed in us by culture, and so on and so on. What Riemann says, nothing about complexity, not for this non-Euclidean research, is that what we presume to be the ultimate validity of geometry cannot be one. So if you presume that the world is simple, let's jump just a bit, we are brought to presume that one shape can describe the world. In example, one geometry, okay? One geometrical system. If is not the case, if we have more geometrical space or topological space that can describe not the whole world, as we mentioned, the theory of the real, but just local phenomena, our metaphysical tendency to security or to unicity will be frustrated, and our sight opens itself to something other, more modular, more, if you will, democratical, more plastic, and so on and so on. There is the momentum of non-Euclidean geometry enacting a more precise discussion about the foundation of mathematics brings us to things from far the complexity, but not directly. You understand? There is 1860 is the last triumphal presentation about non-Euclidean geometry, and complexity arises 1 century after. So there is a long process. Short ways is not the way of serious knowledge, in my view. You know? That's what I would also underline. Entropy per se is not the cipher of complexity, is one of the marks of complexity. By summing all those discoveries and by implementing all those discoveries to our way to conceive the world, scientifically or not, we can become aware in a sort of phenomenology that the world is not so simple as it can pretend it to be. Okay? Because from jumping from epistemic to existential dimension, we are physiologically oriented to simplify things in order to manage them. Okay? I have a friend and colleague in the Collège de France that talk about simplexity. That is, even the animal chasing another animal must simplify on many factors of its field space in order to reach the goal. But the problem is not to hypostatize that simplification as the simplicity of the world in which we act, or in which we live, or in which we know. You know? So the scandal of the men that say no to Euclidean geometry is, if you will, an existential and at the same time a metaphysical scandal. There is, no, I cannot accept that the world is not so easy as my science pretend to be. You know? They show something disturbing. For example, initiated, not by chance, the debate on the foundations, because they show something very elementary, that we hypostatize forms as the unique. It happens for religion, it happens for race, it happens for political systems, it happens for family custom. We hypostatize one form in order to manage the variety of things appearing. But in a world, in a closed world that can be useful, in an open world is very dangerous. And to think that the world has one geometry, the world has one rule following, cause effect, is very, very non-philosophical, what they say. Then we can also talk about philosophy of that phase, because, and this is also the reason why I choose to put three introductory lectures. Because if I explain to you what is complex, you hear me, maybe you listen. If you are a bit interested, you go home and you assimilate what you need in order to fulfill I don't know what, okay? And then you don't assimilate that because your nature is the nature oriented to simplify. It's something biological, okay? So science and knowledge proceed very slow, and philosophy proceed very slowly and carefully by analyzing unfolding moments and by changing the view of our world. If you will, you cannot understand the complex world as it is if you hear just a list of properties. You have, as Plato said, to metamorphose your view itself. And it's like you learn to work by failing, you learn to understand otherwise by such negative things, okay? And then it is more important because today we are submitted to political, as Heidegger also said about science and technique, we are also driven to think this, that the world is simple. For example, a very, very political, strong political ideology coming from the big tech technologies, on which Elon Musk is the most reactionary protagonist, send a message every day by whispering us that our intelligence is like a computing machine. How many times you heard it? Okay? Or that my body can be implemented by a robot or something like that. Brain-machine interface. There's a sort of political issues. Why they do that? Or why they are sure that by claiming such things, we can accept it. Why? We simplify, and the very simplifying idea that our brain is a linear computing machine is very simple to understand. Computing machine, algorithm, okay? Our body is just a complicated machine, if you will, is a Cartesian view, okay? To understand that is not the case, but not from the point of view of feeling, but the point of view of rationality, you have to encounter the moment wherein this vision collapses, okay? It's not the case for non-Euclidean space, because today, after general relativity, Euclidean space is a physical reality. Non-Euclidean space is a physical reality, but it's sort of general metaphysical vision that bring you to simplify and then to obey to certain political and even social issues that are not so evident at all. So the vision by which the world is simple is more than one vision among others. It's a very powerful one, okay? Because it's rational, it's clear, it's performative, okay? But the problem that is not true, it's very, very local. And you have not to take that locality for the universality or for the globality. Yeah? This is in consideration of the fact that we do philosophy and theoretical philosophy and not just recapitulation of science. It's important to see how science itself, there is not mystical prophets coming from the Alps, on the Pyrenees, on the, I don't know which mountains, to say to us. The science itself say, no, it's not so simple. We have evidence for it, okay? Or we have evidence that is not the case. For non-Euclidean geometry, is we believed since antiquity with certain doubt, but not for sure, for granted, but anyway, we think that the first guarantee for our conception of space is our intuition. No, it's not the case. Even if we can draw by this geometry perspectively what we will, is just a false presupposition. That is, we put on the ground of our idea of space something that do not belong to our idea of space. The space is richer, the idea of space, or the varieties of space, is richer as we can pretend on the basis of our mesoscopical perception of the world. I can say as a prophet or as an influencer, the world is larger as we think, but it would be a bit superficial. That is, even to think this is from a point of view of transformation of the self and our approach of the world, to think that the spatiality itself by which we think the world is not one unique spatiality, but more spatialities, okay, of many different kinds, not submitted to one linear logic, is already a great step forward. Okay? I answered? Yeah.
My question is also about this Euclidean space and how Riemann's conception of non-Euclidean space is like revolutionary and things like that. So, like, as a civilization, we have been dealing with a non-Euclidean geometry for a long time, right? Because Earth's surface is non-Euclidean.
What?
Earth's surface is non-Euclidean.
Earth.
Earth.
The Earth.
The planet.
Why is it non-Euclidean? What is non-Euclidean?
It has curvature.
What?
Just because it has curvature does not mean it cannot be quantified into Euclidean space.
Okay.
So, like conceptually, so that is what he's trying to say, that you can use the grid system to actually use it. So I think there must be some epistemological misunderstanding of how you're putting the Euclidean.
No, the Earth is Euclidean because it's a solid aggregation of matter, but the space in which the Earth orbited is not Euclidean.
No, like if you try to like describe a motion of, let's say, a plane or a ship on the surface of the Earth, or the lines or the paths that are going to be taken by them, it won't be in a flat space, right? Like, for example,
I know that is the most often mistake that we do. Thank you for the question. One thing is to say that the surface is a curvilinear that can be rendered fully and perfectly in a Euclidean space. One thing is to say that the space is non-Euclidean. So, the misunderstanding lies on the thing that there is a space surface, there is Europe and there is India, okay? I fly on geodesic with my plane on this surface, okay? And this is a curvilinear trajectory. There is not a curvilinear space, okay?
I understand that.
Okay, no, moment. The transposition is that if I will, or if I had the tools, I can also make that in the same space. In a curvilinear space, if I move myself straight, I must follow the curves itself.
I get that. I understand that. But when you take a triangle on top of a sphere, compare it with a triangle on top of a flat space, like there are so many fundamental dissimilarities. Right? I'm not talking about the metaphysical space itself. I'm talking about it in a mathematical sense, right? Like the geometry of the paths that are taken by the shapes, the geometry of the paths that are taken by the flights, or like the simplest question, like what is the shortest distance between India and America, right? The shortest distance, if you think about it in a Euclidean perspective, it's through the middle of the earth. But if you are trying to navigate this globe, the shortest distance is through the surface of the sphere, right? So, yes, that's what I was trying to say. Yeah. So those kind of, so if you try to crunch those numbers, you cannot do it with a Euclidean idea of distances. Like the metric would not be the same.
The metric would not be the same.
The metric would not be the same. So you can, so this space could be considered as a non-Euclidean space in a mathematical sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we were dealing with this space for quite some time, right? Like, for example, we had very precise navigation through the oceans way before Riemann and everyone. And they were using the mathematical techniques, which was they had their own ways of calculating the shortest distance between two points, or shortest distance between 2 points in the surface of the earth. So we had an intuitive understanding of how to deal with non-Euclidean geometry and how to deal with these things before Riemann himself, right?
Yes, because the first intuition on my knowledge, the first intuition to Gauss came to cartography itself.
Yes.
That's true. But the problem is to apply the problem is when people like Descartes, Desargues, and all those people transformed the geometry, the Euclidean geometry, in the analytical geometry, transformed something that was radically rooted in our perception. Okay, the space as something material, container, and so on. They transform in something empty, and that, if you will, influenced our conception of the non-Euclidean before. So the problem is, in my view, is the science must reach a certain level of maturity in order to discover something. We had it before, as we had many doubts about the consistency of the fifth postulate shown in the late antiquity. The problem, one thing is to say, okay, it's not so clear, but the space is that, so no problem. One thing is to say, no, it's not so clear because it's false. You know, there's a small distinction, but it's a huge distinction. Like the three corp, the three body here. So if I have a billiard with 2 corps and I have a billiard with 3 corps, my geometry is functioning at the same time. The problem is, no, it's false, because there are no 3 corps in this space, and then we have to change my idea of in which that's happened. And if you will, they change the idea of the in which or the wherein it happens is more difficult, it's more hard, as to change the idea of happening or not happening. Sorry.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to understand. I'm coming purely from physics, so I don't know how Riemann actually did all this. For me, like Riemann just gave us the formalism, right? Like it was Einstein who said that Einstein who used the formalism and actually gave us gave us a way in which we can think about the outside world in this like non-Euclidean.
This is a physical quantity.
Yes. Yeah. So, But wasn't Riemann's work more like just constructing a formalism and leaving there? I am trying to see.
This is very difficult, and there is not only Riemann, because the Gauss-Lobachevsky model is sort of pertinent, but Riemann, in my view, is not, I'm informed, competent, but not a specialist in history of mathematics. Riemann linked the idea of space not to our intuition of a continuum quantity, but to a sort of idea of variety, Mannigfaltigkeit. So many, if you will, many discoveries are made by translation, okay? Yeah. So translated the problem, asked or recognized in a form, in another form. So if you think the space as a multiplicity of points, this multiplicity of points cannot be at the same orthogonal level. So the space can also be fluctuating. There's sort of changing the mind on asking the problem. This is what is puzzling me since the beginning. That is, how to ask a problem to a certain point. We discussed that yesterday. At a certain point, our scientific milieu or our mind is ready to see the same otherwise, okay? Like Descartes did, if you will, the geometry that Descartes used and the algebra that Descartes used is already known for many people. But what is the case is, and if they are the same, okay? And what Riemann did is, if the space is not something intuitive given, but is an algebraic multiplicity, what is results? Huh? If there is that, we can think to multiple spaces. They are not corresponding to the orthogonal tridimensional space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me if I understood correctly. You are trying to say that to oversimplify and reduce Descartes' understanding of a dualism is oversimplification and reduction.
Please?
You are trying to say, are you trying to say that to reduce and oversimplify Descartes' understanding of a dualism between mind and body is an oversimplification?
Yeah.
Are you trying to say that?
No, I've said that I'm not ready to say that Descartes believes in the fact that the body is more than a machine, but from at that time, after all occult physiologies of the Renaissance, Paracelsus, medicine, alchemy, and so on, he takes the decision to simplify in order to clearly understand what it is. That is, many anti-specists accuse Descartes because Descartes is the enemy, my aunt, my dog, or my pet, even dog and pet, not the ecosystem, even dog and pets. This is very bourgeoisie situation, are more than machines, okay? But they don't understand at which time, at what time, and in which situation Descartes took the decision to simplify, and for which purpose, okay? And even the same story, he took the decision to simplify not because he was believing that the reality is just machinery. Firstly, at least, in order to understand more clearly what it is to be an interacting body among molecules and so on, about atoms and so on. Then that brought, for example, for gravitation, for astronomical things, to many problems, to a sort of scholasticism and so on. But by simplifying the problem, or by reducing the problem to a simplest context of reasonment, he reached something very important. And then we can enlarge rationally what Descartes did on the basis of this simplification. It's just a bit a story, meta-theoretical spoken, the dialogue, the struggle between interdisciplinarity and disciplinarity. The people say that to begin with a interdisciplinarity formation is now the best of the education system. I would say take care to underestimate the disciplinarity, okay? Because in one case, people having been able to manage their discipline can open themselves to other discipline with more competence than someone that comes for a sort of chaotic turbulence of notion without ordering something or something the other in a field or not. You know, it's the same thing. This is the disciplinarization of science and knowledge by analytic method by Descartes was at the time a choice and a decision in order to make the science and knowledge progress, not because Descartes was a partisan of simplicity. So, I don't know, this is many questions about Descartes. If Descartes believe in God or not, if Descartes think that the animals are a machine or not. But anyway, it's clear that for a first approach to living system, to think them as machine is helpful. One thing is to think that is helpful, one thing is to think that is exclusive. You know? Like also social systems. I will never claim that the social system is ruled by mechanic laws. But if the mechanic of social system can give us a certain clear approach to the thing, then we can nuance it, we can implement it, we can change it, we can criticize it. We have, nevertheless, a clear approach to the thing. Okay? If we take the things honest from the beginning, it's very difficult to manage it from the point of view of clear understanding. I go.
So my question is, how are we supposed to understand the nature of time and its characteristics like linearity, uniformity, and continuity after the emergence of non-Euclidean geometry?
It's impossible. So, no, just one. Space and depends from which it is. After Einstein is impossible because it's demonstrated. After the Euclidean geometry is not so impossible because one thing is a model and one thing is the reality. So it's not say that the sort of topological model of space on wherein one dimension is time is something existing in nature. But after Einstein is impossible. We have clear demonstration, empirical demonstration that time and space are not homogeneous and linear.
Right, right. So what is the new understanding depending on the new non-Euclidean geometry of time?
Of time, I would say more than, I would pretend more by thermodynamics. Non-Euclidean geometries are not linked, but yeah.
So one of the understandings from the principles of thermodynamics we are right now establishing but cannot be proven is that it can be expansive space, rate of expansion of space can be a quantity that we can qualify as time. Because in the black hole, when they say, so coming back to your question from the point of how this is popular, this became popular as a question also, is that they say that within a black hole, time becomes static. So the idea why they are saying this is actually related to why the space itself stops expanding. So the rate we cannot actually measure. So that rate itself is the unit which we call time. In that sense. So in that sense, that is why when Sir says that it's a thermodynamic unit which makes it component, it's the expansiveness which really matters. More on it, I think has been done by Penrose and
Penrose.
others
Well, it's
have done a
cosmology,
very
yeah.
good job there. I think
I
you'll
think
find
Rovelli
it in-
also was mentioning the same thing, that
I know, it's my friend, so.
it's only the second law of thermodynamics which gives an idea of the directionality of time, and no other physical law perhaps.
Yeah, but it's not homogeneous and Euclidean.
Right, not homogeneous.
And then the thing is that we can conceive many forms of time and many metrics of time, not one metric. The problem is what such discoveries break is the unicity. Okay?
uniformity.
No, this is unicity of one shape of time, then also, in this case, also the homogeneity of time itself.
Thank you.
You can also ask a more philosophical question. It's not, I'm not only philosopher of science, ontology and so on and so on.
A larger part of what you were trying to explain with the scientific model or the approach of complexity.
What?
A larger part of what you're dealing with, actually, in terms of systems, comes back to Popperian idea.
Two?
Popper, Karl Popper.
Yeah, is very near to Popper epistemology, of course.
And
That
but
is,
again, in your previous lectures, you also contradicted him with Kuhn's against the system kind of model also.
what?
Against the methods.
Against the methods.
You remember in the
Yeah, I remember.
second lecture you said something about against the method, but most of the things, the way I'm seeing the lecture series is that mostly you're following a Popperian structure,
Yeah?
but you're also some way trying to articulate a certain concepts through against method sort of system.
Against meta?
It is by Paul Fairbairn against
Yeah, Fairbairn. Yeah.
Fairab.
Fairbairn. So,
Fairab.
sorry, I was
Okay.
missing the name.
Fairab.
So I
Fairab.
wanted to understand how these two contradictory ideas you're taking forward in your system to explain complexity.
No, there is not to say explain complexity. Explain the status of our understanding of complex world. So this is there will be an epistemological feature of complexity science, or complexity, when complexity is an homogeneous coded science. For the while, is not an homogeneous coded science, so we cannot have a sort of clear epistemology of complexity. We can just transform our epistemology in order to adapt it to complexity. So I will more be Popperian as Feyerabenian, but I don't understand in which I appear Feyerabenian.
So what you're saying is that the best way for you to explain complexity is that you'd be seeing it in the units and then build the whole system.
No, I never seen that. No, that is the way the analytics approach, epistemic approach too.
That was my real question.
No, this is complexity. No, complexity is a holistic, that is the whole as always a priority on the parts. That is in the analytic view, the wholes depends from the composition of the parts. In complexity, the whole is not fully depending from the part, there's a certain priority as a system. So we cannot understand epistemologically complexity by analytic solutions.
So you're saying there's no formal structure to it. We can never put a formal structure to it. Like we cannot formalize the approach. Or
No, we can formalize the approach, but it is not a one epistemology of complexity.
Yeah.
I will not present to you an epistemology of complexity anyway.
So all that we will be doing is that we use certain frameworks. For example,
Yeah.
thermodynamics might be one of the frameworks to understand the
Yeah.
complexity of
Yeah.
a certain nature within one system, but for certain other systems, we might
Okay.
use some other means.
Epistemic modularity.
I'm simply flying your answer for myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I still say?
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I could not attend those, but I'm quite familiar with this. I wonder this, all these theories of time, like in the history, okay, it's from the starting with Plato and Aristotle. Plato being creating a metaphor to explain the time. Aristotle and aporia of time. Then the Middle Ages, interestingly, the Albertus Magnus and others saying that no, time is in the nature. Whether you think it or not, or whether you live or die, the time will flow anyway. And something similar, Descartes, with all its method of negation and reduction, still leave time and space for the object.
Undisturbed.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. Then my question is, isn't it a kind of, at least from Descartes, a historical a prioritization of time?
Historical?
A prioritization of time.
Of course.
Culminated somehow in Kant. Then again, when moving on, like went ahead. So I'm interested in the kind of very subtle transcendental spirit in this kind of rethinking space and time in 19th century, Riemann, Gauss, and others, until Einstein and further. So I mean, like Nietzsche say, you have to look behind the philosopher. What drives the philosophers to do these things? The same with the scientists. So is there a historical progression of transcendentalism in all this?
I will not mention, but in the drive there is a paper just on that, because there is a recent approach to epistemology of quantum mechanics that Michael Bachtold, this is in the Schweiz, who has interpreted, and I follow this interpretation, the approach of Einstein as a transcendental one. That is, anyway, Einstein is a classical physicist, even as he's the greatest genius of physics, but is classical in the sense that for him, the unicity of the model made the strength of physics. And driving his physics is a sort of not transcendental philosophy explicit, because it was very critical about Kant, as space and time as form of intuition, wherein for general relativity quantity of matter. But there is sort of ideal of transcendental unicity of a physical model. For this reason, I wrote, I will present tomorrow, this article, APR, on incompleteness of physics in regard to quantum mechanics, because there is a sort of architectural, but every Greek genius of that time followed this romantic idea to build a unique form of knowledge. Russell, against which the incompleteness theorems shows Gödel shows that it's not compatible. Einstein and Heisenberg and Bohr, or even Frege. So there is sort of, or Heidegger, even Heidegger and Husserl, there's a sort of generational split. And all these great fathers of great rationality of the 20th century, coming from the 19th century, have in some way still the idea that either the science or knowledge is one, or is impossible for it to be. On the contrary, the young people, Heisenberg, even Bohr was the other generation, remember, Heisenberg, Gödel, Heidegger, they don't presuppose this presupposition coming from rationalism. So I will not say that fully Einstein is a rationalist, but anyway, it's depending from the same movement of rationalism that give rise to Kant, that gives rise to Hegel, and so on and so on.
No, in fact, when I was working on this for my dissertation also, I was really amazed and, by this work of Geometry and Erfahrung.
Geometry
and Experience by Einstein. That was a lecture given at the Prussian Academy in 2010, I think. 2010, that was this advent of relativity and all. very Einstein typical, and starting with the Euclidean geometry, and then non-Euclidean, and defining the continuity in a different way. It's
The
like
continuity of
infinity, define the
infinity.
infinity. So the Euclidean infinity, which is very, you can say, radial, centripetal.
Yeah.
And then he say it's a circle, unending, you are
Yeah.
just revolving, that's also an infinity. Yeah? Of course, these are different models, I would say. Like Mary Hesse says, you are creating the model, right? You are creating the models based on mathematics, and also it depends on the zeitgeist of the mathematics.
Yeah,
you know.
that's right, or physics or chemistry.
Even
yeah.
like Hubert Damisch say, that was the time, the kind of early 20th century, the people were so excited about the non-Euclidean, the relativity, and even in art it is the cubism, and Panofsky started thinking everything curvilinear and all
Yeah.
that. So that, you know, all these things influence our thought process in some way.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, and Einstein is also one of them.
That took away nothing from the genius.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But it's, for example, I mentioned it yesterday, it's the same thing for incompleteness and so on. That is, Husserl was informed 3 times that someone in Königsberg presented something like incompleteness of formal logic, and he reacted as nothing was. Why? Because his background is the background of a sort of massive maximalist rationalism, wherein Gödel or people like Wittgenstein or the people like Heisenberg smelled the time of a crisis, and for them, this idea of the great unity is like the idea of the great fest in the music Roman, you know. They read Schopenhauer, they read any other, this is other cultural reference. And then this other cultural reference, they enable that geniuses to sit on the rock, like Heisenberg in Helgoland, and to ask this thing differently. Why the matrices must convert?
Wittgenstein went to war.
Huh?
Wittgenstein
see-
went to
Well,
war.
No, again, I mean, so my point is the crisis always existed in science. Because especially the mathematics and philosophy, because somehow you have to incorporate the aporias. And people argued against aporias. For example, yesterday you were discussing, or day before, yesterday, this transition from the synthetic to the analytical in the with Descartes in the medieval. So in the medieval scholasticism or the Philosophia Naturalis, they were struggling with this, whether there is an infinity. Because the Aristotelian model, which was unquestioned, it was always a synthetic. And so the space has a limit. You know? So I don't know, 2 monastic orders, they were arguing, one saying that space is infinite, the other saying that the space is infinite. I use it in my class, so my students have heard it many times. You go to the limit and with a sword and plunge into that limit. Yeah, and Einstein would say you can still plunge, the sword will be a curve, you know, will curve. So all these models you create, mental models, I would say, as Mary Hesse would say.
Firstly,
Yeah. My interest is whether these models helps us to access the reality, or does it block the reality? That's my question.
The problem is that in 2 things. You see that you say that science is always in crisis. I will not pretend it. There is massive. This is the for example, Indian, Babylonian, Mesopotamian, and first Greek science lies in continuity of exchange, of osmosis, but not in science. When arrives the irrational by the Greeks, then begins the science crisis. I will not say that even by struggling to the better understanding, medieval science is in crisis. The crisis appears when a model is not able to that is more Kuhnian, incorporate something, and at the time of scientific astronomical revolution is unable to incorporate a huge mass of information, then it must collapse. The problem is the model, that is the mental model, is developed in every form of knowledge, even in philosophy, by a hard work of refinement of structure. So the intuition by the new mental model is not something plötzlich, this is a sort of like a revelation. It can be considered as a revelation, but on the background there is a hard work. That is, Heisenberg, before having the idea that not necessarily matrices must converge, worked for 3 years, like his mind, in order to reach this small intuition. So, and by this convergence, by intuition or the state or the structural intuition, also by aesthetics, from one side, but works on stuff, concept, deductions, formalism, you can reach a better understanding of the world, or better, enlarged, narrower. Yes.
Might not be the only way, but the best way.
Huh?
Might not be the only way, but the best way. Might not be the only way, but one of the best way.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so while we are discussing the crisis in sciences, what I wanted to ask you is, if you were to compare science and religion within the same epistemological framework, or how can sciences come up with the best model to decipher the world, to interpret reality? What happens, I mean, this is Kuhn's idea, right? That every time that a particular theory, like it fails to function, it fails to provide solutions, sciences go through a period of crisis,
Yeah.
right? So,
Or revision, not the crisis
Yeah.
is a huge word. Yeah.
So basically, in physics, there, as we go deeper, by deeper I mean at the molecular level, physicists are discovering smaller and smaller particles, right? So basically, what lies at the core of everything, like that is the question, right? And that is also a question that religion tries to answer, right? Because religion is also a very metaphysical attempt to interpret reality, whether there's a God or not. So, can you comment on that? When
Yeah,
religion
this is a factor of sort of complementarity and continuity, where the science stops, religions begin to answer. So it depends from which questions are able to be answered, or that must be answered, why we search necessarily an answer for every question, and why religion eventually, is not my idea, can intervene by answering questions that science cannot answer. So I don't think that the thing is so easy, that okay, the science stops and then comes the old religion, just a bit fashioned and answer the question. The problem is the consistency of this answer. It's a sort of palliative of our feeling about existence. Everyone can take the answers he wants. But I'm not sure that answering to the mortal question is necessary. So we can live, and the Eastern culture learned us to live even in the uncertainty about the absolute, without answering the question, and instead meditating on sort of greed beyond, without fulfill with entity, with deities, and so on and so on. So there is also a necessary distinction between forms of spirituality and classical in sense of canonical religion. Of course, if I'm disoriented in a word, I grasp what I can in order to stabilize my horizon, but the problem is I really need to such fake answer, because if the people say, okay, for example, what also Lemaitre, there was a priester said about Big Bang is not the creation of the world, what was repeated and modeled by Perrault, by Big Crunch, Big Bunch, and so on and so on. That is, classical religion, creationistic religion cannot answer to the question why we are there or not. There is just metaphysics, okay? So it can suggest an answer in order to live better. I'm not so positivist to say that religion not no role to play, but it is the answer that we search, that we're searching for. There is also this. It's very interesting because that was elaborated also in the West because of idea of complementarity or opposition. Okay, but complementarity would mean that a whole must or a space must be fulfilled. Where in spirituality say, okay, till this point I can argumentate, describe my world rationally, and then script something other, what Wittgenstein say, the mystical, okay? But I don't need religion in order to articulate the feeling of the beyond or the feeling of my finitude. Not necessary in any case, you know?
Okay, so basically it's science and religion, they are complementary.
It could be, that I would say, science never excluded a form of spirituality. Okay? But if include necessarily a form of religion, because not every religion is the same, so it becomes from which answer. So now it comes from a Catholic word, so now I can even find in my deep sources and roots when someone comes to me and say that God created the world and say that I must be revealed by the gospel and you not, that's the answer, or the eternal life is the answer. I don't know. That depends from which level of evidence you can accept for the answer.
Just one more follow-up question. So there's a book called Wild Experiments written by Donovan Schaefer. And what he attempts to do is he basically tries to interpret sciences through affect theory, right? And his idea is also very similar to what you suggested, that science and religion are complementary. So he brings in numerous examples, Einstein, Ramanujan, saying that there is this Indian mathematician who was deeply religious, right? And a lot of the times, like, he interpreted his mathematical theories as religious experiences that he has had.
Even Cantor.
Sorry?
Even Cantor for the
Even
transfinite.
Kant, for that matter. So
He wasn't in asylum, anyway.
yeah. So like, what I mean to ask you is, why is it that, you know, like, we have this tendency to, like, always draw a very hard distinction between like, what is religion and what is science? What does this compartmentalization like offers us?
The
What benefits
shareability.
it offers us?
The shareability. That is what the science as a rationalist approach is shareable as criticizable immanently without losing the whole. The science can work to redefine itself, to overcome the crisis, and so on and so on. I'm not sure that if you touch some very, very decisive article of theological elements of one religion can subsist. You know, that's the problem. Now we have just another science in confrontation to 2 centuries ago, but the science is always the same common place in order to ask questions, solve problem, and a sort of self-implementing body. I'm not sure that religion can live after you criticize some elementary notion. You know, I'm not sure. I would say that it's impossible. I'm not sure. For example, the religion without a religion that gives answer to your struggle for your quest of absolute meaning of life cannot subsist with gods or with creationism or with a sort of idea of absolute entity beyond. You know, that you go to the spiritualism of Buddhism and so on and so on. There is religion and other spiritual practices that are not close structural element subsisting science millenarists give to it. If you are Hindu or if you're Christian, you have to believe that, that, or that. Beyond, you cannot go. Okay? If you don't believe if you don't believe that in the Eucharisty you have a part or you become parts of the divinity of God by the Christus, you cannot be Christian. No. Then you can make a patchwork, but it's your own form of spirituality. It's not a religion. You know? Yeah.
Yes, I have a question actually, which I am finding quite difficult to phrase. But,
What?
Which I'm finding quite difficult to phrase, but I hope you would understand what I'm trying to ask. So I'm trying to link Heidegger's understanding of being in terms of temporality with
Heidegger's understanding of being
in terms of temporality, time, and the non-unicity of time that we get from non-Euclidean geometry. I think we talked about this. So Heidegger, I think for Heidegger, he says that being is epochal. It's different for, I mean, we understand it in a different way in every age. But then he says that so far from Plato onwards, maybe, this science is based, of course, science based on the understanding of being, but he says that science has been understood as technique, not episteme. So it is something that we put to use. But now, when we talk about the non-unicity of time, we again looking at it from Heideggerian point of view, if we understand being in terms of temporality, now that we have different temporalities, we understand being in different ways. So how does it guarantee us that what we will be producing would be episteme, not techne? I mean, how can we be sure that what we are producing is only the working hypothesis, not the science, I mean the laws per se?
Can you repeat slowly the last part of your question? Are we sure that?
Sorry. Yes, I talk much. So,
It's a matter of understanding. It's not a matter of.
It's okay, thank you. So my question would be that if we understand being in terms of temporality.
Yeah.
So, but now when we talk about the non-unicity of time, because we are saying time is not one, it is different. We can understand it in different ways. So, in the same way, we can understand being in different ways because we are interpreting being in terms of time only.
Yeah.
So, how can we be sure that what we will be producing is science? I mean, as technique.
How we can be sure that what we are producing
is science as episteme, not technique?
Okay, that's two things. There is two main forms of temporality in the Science-Geschichte by Heidegger. This is Temporalität und Zeitlichkeit. So the temporality of phenomena are form of Zeitlichkeit, and then we can admit even different form of Zeitlichkeit. Well, on the contrary, the temporality of being itself is what makes the history of being. That is what led us today think of the being in terms of technique, that is in terms of disposable, and so on and so on. So the problem is just by criticizing that approach by which nature is simple and indisposable that we resist to the technological driven of our epoch. That will be said in the last lecture, but anyway, there is sort of cultural and not metaphysical, anthropological value. That is what we explain today till the foundational crisis is a perception of time and of being that wherein science and technique are one, the prelude of the other, okay? And then today, technique or technology counts more than science, but they are still together, okay? The problem is that for me, not for me, this is either a very, very pessimistic vision, in my view, and an anti-theological one view of history. For me, what happened in science give also tool to resist to this. So today, by science, we can also think to ecosystem in a non-mechanical, disposable point of view. And science can learn and can build an alternative for the soil erosion technology and liberist systems. So that is what the difference with Heidegger. This is, for Heidegger is something destinal, irreversible. And what comes to hand, and the God that save us, or another form of thinking, there's a sort of poetizing thinking, and so on. I do not agree with this, because in science itself, there is more or less unitary, more or less blind, as Heidegger presents. There is many, many issues and tools and motives that help us to resist to this idea.
I just want to comment to this religion science problem. We have to be very clear about it, because that the Platonic foundations of philosophy and science in Sophist or Republic, it's about episteme, not doxa.
Yeah.
So that differentiation made by Plato, and which passed over throughout the history. Now, like that's the beautiful, one of the last part of Critique of Pure Reason I always teach my students, Meinung, Glauben und Wissen. This is one of the last part of Critique of Pure Reason. Opinion, belief, and knowledge. So what is knowledge or a knowledge system? What is belief or a belief system? For example, an opinion is not legitimized, not really in science or philosophy, but in politics, yes. Belief in religion, but not in philosophy. Maybe not in science in any case. Knowledge, it is both in philosophy and science, there is a clear legitimacy. So I think we can discuss at that level, and whether somebody is religious or not, or spiritual or not.
Or we can develop a combinatory between which
Exactly.
part of meaning, which part of opinion,
Yeah.
which part of beliefs is in science.
Exactly. So as a matter of fact, what we think as knowledge may not be knowledge, it may be belief. So I believe, okay, the belief system and the knowledge system are not separable the way we thought. So it's always intermingled, and
it's more hybrid as it
exactly,
of course.
But at the same time, we should at least have an understanding of it is science that deals with the knowledge system. And that happened with the medieval scholastic philosophers. There were many. And they were philosophers, they were scientists, there was philosophy naturalis. If you believe in God, why do you need a Gottes Beweis? If I believe in God, why do I need a proof of God? But they all tried for a proof of God. So there you see that dogma or belief is not enough. You need knowledge. Yeah. So in that way, but I would say you cannot make a compromise on that, saying that these are complementary and interchangeable.
No, but when the beliefs and the opinion of the individual of a group disappear, what remains is the invariant that the one difference, in my view, our philosophy can individuate. For example, today, instead, on the contrary, what say the new realism, to think in a pre-Kantian sense is a bit naive or a bit nostalgic, or to think in a pre-Husserlian sense is a sort of, there is beliefs, there is in background driving forces coming from culture, but what lies on the table when all the people are away is something shareable for something other that comes, that begins to read and then take new tools to understand newly, That is not a qualitative in the sense of normative. There is a qualitative difference between rationality and not, including philosophy or the part of philosophy that can be shareable or not. For example, You can criticize Hegel for whatever you want. You can criticize Marx for whatever you want, but what they let on the table and what we can receive in order to understand the social world is shareable for everyone. Analysis, and so on and so on. That is just sort of the beliefs and opinion that nourish. I'm one of those that thinks that science, I've said at the first lecture, arise from the life world. So, and then also the science of the scientist or the philosophy of the philosopher arise and nourish itself with the life world, with the changing dimension, multidimensionality of life world, belief, acceptation, social engagement, commitments, and so on and so on. But what rests when the individuals has vanished is the concrete capacity that some words give to understand better.
Just like, the philosopher says things in various ways. And I always
Philosopher?
say things in various ways. Again, for Thomas Aquinas, it's always about God's grace. Without God, we cannot survive. It's all the knowledge should be given from the God. When it comes to Descartes, he was very careful, first of all. He finally said, of course the God exists, because I have no other way to say, because I have to admit that he exists, because the internal ideas can only be created by God. And because there is a God that we exist. So this is a kind of marginalization of God also, because it's not a possibility, it's actually my impossibility that I have to accept. So this, how to say, accentuism, the accentuation that varies with all. And when it comes to Kant, it completely disappears also. So interesting debate, but I would say not that we, move in the periphery of all this, but going deeper into it, that we have whether do I believe or do I know? This question should be asked. Am I actually believing certain things or am I knowing things?
Yeah. You can also let the things coexist. No problem. For example, in a letter or in a sort of telegram to a Jewish journal, Einstein said, "No, I believe in the God of Spinoza, that is Deus sive naturae. We cannot reject his invention or even his philosophy because he believes in God of Spinoza. The God of Spinoza is a drift in order to think better, to articulate, or to harmonize better in a whole what he thinks. But then what remains are not the belief on the Deus sive natura, are the equations, or for Husserl are the analysis, or for Hegel are the science of logic or phenomenology of spirits, at the netto of every historical presupposition. That it's difficult to think without those issues. No?
I have a small question, sir. So, from the works of Bernard Stiegler,
What?
the Anthropocene, Stiegler's work.
Stiegler.
Yeah, Bernard Stiegler.
Bernard Stiegler,
Yeah.
okay.
So he opposes like entropy to negative entropy, and he
Yeah,
takes it
negative.
from Schrodinger's essays of a cell, life of a cell essay.
Yeah.
And is there a tendency in complex systems also to go back to like simple systems where entropy, negative entropy?
No, the negentropy, negentropy is very, very common thing. So we will approach in the next feature, but negentropy is a sort of need or feature of living system to limitate or to resist to entropy. This is to thermal death, thermic death. There is a feature, but it's not a feature of complex system at all. It's a feature of a special kind of complex system within the entropy of physical realm must be contrasted with a sort of negative force in order to keep the system alive. Yeah, but we will approach that.
I just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
how. I just wanted to ask how someone like Heinrich Hertz
would fit into this narrative? Because build is a
Heinrich Hertz,
Hertz, yeah,
the electromagnetism field.
yes, yes, and Heinrich Hertz was also in a kind of debate with Ernst Mach. I mean, and they had a
Hugely, and what I pretend to say also to my phenomenological colleague and friends, that it influences radically even the idea of Husserl of Ich Pol and Gegenstand Pol and horizon. That is, it was massively present, massively present. There is Hertz is one of the most figure in Vienna or in the Austrian culture that is everywhere, ubiquitous, would I say.
yeah, and I think Ludwig Boltzmann later takes up Hertz and then kind of develops a more Darwinistic account of build, like says that sort of says that build is something. I mean the physical theories which are builders and pictures are also something that evolves over generations. So and their conception is that theory starts with internal pictures, right?
Yeah, the problem is there is sort of pre-modern or pre-contemporary feelings that theories as pictures evolves. Because in this way, theory and picture do not evolve, increase in definition, you know. For this reason, that is very, very central.
We meet tomorrow here, 2 p.m.
Can you take the